our channel. In this video, we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And this video, I would like to start with a statement that was made by the President of the United States of America. During the previous 12 hours, he stated that Zelensky gave Putin reason to bomb the hell out of Ukraine. Once again, that was stated by the 47th President of the United States of America. And obviously, this statement is something like a green light for the President of the Russian Federation to continue doing everything they do right now. And the Russians continue. We got a lot of interesting updates from the entire line of combat contact. And first, let's talk about the Sumy direction, where both the Russians and the Ukrainians are trying to attack each other, trying to get the initiative in their hands. And first, let's talk about the Ukrainian side, because according to information we have, the situation in the settlement of Tetkina is critical, became critical. According to information we have, the Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their position significantly to the east of the settlement and to the southwest of the settlement of Tetkina. The pro-Russian resources reported that the situation is very difficult, and this is approximately the map that we can see right now in front of your screens is the situation on the ground by the morning of the 7th of June of 2025. According to pro-Russian resources, during the previous 12 hours, the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions and to answer the settlement of Tetkina from the east and to establish control over these farms. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions in the southwestern part and to take several streets and several buildings in this area. So, summarizing everything, currently by the morning of the 7th of June of 2025, the Ukrainians improved their positions, let's say, inside of this yellow line, between this yellow line and, let's say, the border between Russia and Ukraine. This is obviously very huge progress on the ground, and now we have no doubts that the Russians were caught in cauldron or were caught in operational encirclement by the Ukrainians. The Russians suffer huge problems with supply and support because main roads are under complete fire control from Ukrainian side with artillery and FPV drones. But despite all these problems, the Russians hold their positions and the Russians are not going to give up. But it doesn't mean that the Russians are able to hold these positions even if they decide to hold this area for as long as possible. Obviously, the Ukrainians are going to intensify their pressure, and obviously the Ukrainians are going to use this battle as a media victory. And, from the other side, several pro-Russian resources reported that Ukrainians are going to use the settlement of Tetkina and Popovo-Lizhichi as a foothold before further offensive operation in the northeastern direction, in the direction of the settlement of Glushkova. The Russians are saying that Ukrainians are going to use these maneuvers with the purpose to outflank Russian main forces in the original Sumy direction and to ruin Russian plans regarding offensive operation deep inside of the territory of the Sumy Oblast. So now the Russians are going to have to make several changes in their tactics, because obviously the Russians will be forced to redeploy back forces in the direction of Tetkina, either to stabilize the situation around the settlement and not to allow the Ukrainians to take these settlements under complete control, or to stabilize the situation along the next defense belt that goes between the settlements of Karavovka and Zhukhinovka, so along this red line.
Jeg står her med vores nye turbodrevede åndedrætsværn Callisto. Et turbodrevet åndedrætsværn er jo noget, man
At the same time, the Russian forces continue their offensive operation in the original Sumy direction. As we discussed, there are three directions: the western flank, the central positions, and the eastern flank. And during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions along the central direction and the eastern direction. When talking about the western flank, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received almost anything from this area. The most important is that pro-Ukrainian sources from deep state confirmed Russian control over the settlement of Kondratovka and Alexeyevka. Furthermore, during the previous night, we got another video from Alexeyevka where we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russian units on the territory of this village. I'll remind you that this village was colored by most of the mappers as based on the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation report, and now we got additional confirmation of Russian control with this territory. Here we can see Ukrainians that were FPV droning the Russians in the most southern part of the village. So based on these updates, we haven't adjusted anything, but we just got additional confirmation of Russian progress on the ground and Russian control over this territory. Furthermore, during the previous 12 hours, we got several unconfirmed reports that the Russians managed to improve their positions in the direction of Khotin, and that currently the distance between edge positions of the armored force of the Russian Federation and the village of Khotin is less than 4 kilometers. So most likely during the day we should wait additional changes on the ground in the direction of this settlement. When talking about the central part of Sumy offensive operation, the most important updates are coming from the settlement of Yablunovka, because today the Ukrainian sources published this video where we can see how Ukrainians were FPV droning and attacking Russian units on the territory of the village. So now we have proofs that the Russians entered this territory. When talking about the previous day, about the 6th of June of 2025, these territories used to be considered as an area in the gray zone or contested area. And now we have proofs that the Russians managed to answer the village, and probably there are very heavy clashes, but based on these videos we just discussed, we have adjusted the map completely in Russian favor. And furthermore, several mappers reported that the Russians moved even further in the southwestern direction, and based on this report we have adjusted the map. This information was provided by neutral mappers. So once again, during the previous night, during the previous 12 hours, the Russians managed to secure the village of Yablunovka and to move further in the southern direction towards the settlement, towards the next settlement along N7 road, the settlement of Marina and Novosich. So this is very important. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly on the eastern flank of the Sumy offensive, but when talking about this area, the main updates are coming not from the settlement of Yunakievka, because we still haven't received anything regarding additional progress on the ground that can be confirmed both by, let's say, pro-Ukrainian sources, reliable or neutral mappers, or geolocations, and of course, or the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. Nothing of that was published, so that is why the settlement of Yunakievka still remains under complete, almost under complete and strong control of the armored forces of Ukraine. But the Russians, during the previous 24 hours, began unexpected offensive operation in the direction of the settlement by the name of Satki. This is a small village of Satki that is located inside of this dense network of tree lines and forest belts. So what's happened? Let's compare the map. This is the situation on the ground by the end of the 6th of June of 2025. And according to information we have, the Russians entered this forest and the Russians managed to finish the battle for this forest. So let's compare the maps, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 7th of June. So most likely the Russians will try to outflank the settlement of Yunakievka from the east, but for this purposes the Russians most likely would try first of all to establish complete control over this forest belt, over these forests, and over the settlement of Satki. So this is most likely is the main task of the Russians for the next several weeks. This will allow the Russians to outflank the settlement of Yunakievka and to worsen the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine there. So this is the situation on the eastern flank of the global Sumy offensive, and this is the situation on the western flank of the same battle. The Battle of Sumy is going to be a very interesting battle, and obviously it will last for several weeks or probably months during the summer military campaign. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Kharkiv direction. During the previous night, according to information we have, the Russians attacked the city of Kharkiv with a significant number of drones and missiles. And this is the video that we got from the city of Kharkiv during the previous night. And according to information we have, at night Kharkiv experienced the largest attack. More than 50 explosions were heard in 2 hours in Kharkiv. Just imagine yourself, 50 explosions during 2 hours. According to monitoring channels and Ukrainian officials, missiles, FABs, and Shahed drones were used in the combined attack. The city is covered in smoke after the landings. So lots of explosions, as you can see, in different parts of the city of Kharkiv, and we see Ukrainians have no air defense in this area, and obviously this is very interesting information and very interesting situation. Obviously the Russians were trying to destroy as many as possible, probably military facilities, some industrial zones that Ukraine used to produce drones or something like this, and most likely we can make a conclusion that based on this video, most likely the Russians are planning to resume their offensive operation in this direction as well, because obviously the Russians most likely were trying to destroy as many as possible temporary deployment points and warehouses, and this situation could lead to complete collapse of Ukrainian logistics and supply and support along the border. And let's wait, most likely today something huge may happen. The Russians may attack in the direction of Kharkiv through the settlement of Kazachia Lopань, The Russians may try to resume their attempts to attack in the vicinity of Volchansk, and of course, the Russians may resume their attempts or start offensive operation in the most northeastern part of the Kharkiv Oblast. And when talking about the northeastern part of the Kharkiv Oblast, today we got some changes on the ground based on the video that was published by the Ukrainian sources. This video was published by the Ukrainians, and here we can see how Ukrainians were bombing and attacking Russians in this area on the Ukrainian side of the river Voskol. Lots of explosives were dropped on the Russia's heads of Russian soldiers, lots of explosions and many other things, lots of episodes that were geolocated. And for example, based on this video, we have adjusted these territories. So all these territories is to be considered as a gray zone because several mappers before published these territories were captured by the Russians, and just this morning on the 7th of June we got proofs that that indeed happened. So maybe the Russians are going to intensify their activities in this area. And once again today, from the settlement of Kupinsk-Ugzlavoy, we got additional video how the Russians destroyed the main logistic bridge in this area. This bridge wasn't destroyed during the previous night, it was destroyed several days ago. Yesterday we discussed the situation, but today we got the video of how the Russians attacked this bridge, but from another angle. So something huge is going to happen in the northeastern part of the Kharkiv Oblast. And I would like to remind you once again that according to the memorandum that was published by the Russians and provided to Ukrainians about the peaceful settlement of the conflict, there were nothing about the secure zone in the vicinity of Sumy, and nothing was written there about the Kharkiv Oblast, which means that most likely the Russians would be forced to change their memorandum in the future if they are able to improve their positions here. Now let's move further. Let's discuss the situation in the Kliban-Bykske direction. During the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special, just regular activities of the Russians, but the most interesting videos are coming from the settlement of Rusin Yar. The thing is that during the previous night, the Russians intensified their activities in this area. We got lots of geolocations, a lot of videos of how the Russians were attacking this territory, and based on this video, we can make a conclusion that most likely the Russians are planning to attack the village of Rusin Yan in the very near future. Because so many videos, so many explosions we got exactly from this direction. This is not just like regular activities, this is obviously something like FPV drone preparation and artillery preparation of the settlement. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Dnipro direction, because the most interesting and the biggest number of updates are coming also from this area. The most interesting is that the Russians managed to improve their positions on the way to the Dnipro region. And if you remember, we discussed the situation yesterday. This information was confirmed yesterday also by pro-Ukrainian mappers. They reported that the distance between Russian positions and the border of the Dnipro region was already less than 600 meters. And today we got several adjustments on the map based on the several mappers. So currently the distance, according to sources, between Russian positions and the border to the Dnipro is less than 1 kilometer. Now let's talk about the Kamar direction. As we can see, we have a lots of icons in this area, and the most important geolocation is coming from the eastern part of the settlement of Alexeyevka. This video was published by the Ukrainian sources, and this video we can see how Ukrainians of 46 Air Mobile Brigade were attacking and FPV droning the Russians in the most eastern part of the settlement. Several episodes were geolocated, and one of them took place exactly in this area along the Nezalezhnosti Street. So based on this video, we came to the conclusion that the Russians managed to improve their positions in the eastern part of the settlement of Alexeyevka. Basically, the Russians managed to take under complete control the eastern part, and currently the clashes are taking place for the central part of this village, and the Russians continue their offensive. When talking about the settlement of Kamar, we got lots of very important updates. I'll remind you that just yesterday the Russians established complete control over the village of Kamar. We have lots of proofs. We have the report of the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, and the most important, we have lots of videos and episodes where the Russians were raising their flags in the central and the northern parts of the settlement of Fedorovka. This is the southern village. This is the village that is located to the south of the settlement of Kamar. And today we got additional changes on the ground. The Russians managed to improve their positions around the village of Fedorovka in the western direction by taking under control several tree lines. Furthermore, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the southern part of the settlement of Kamar. So this is, for example, the situation by the end of the 6th of June, and this is the situation by the morning of the 7th of June. So few more buildings and constructions were taken by the Russians, and the most important is video that is coming from the road M15. Let's take a look at this video, and here we can see how Russian drone was dropping lists and papers, different applications suggesting Ukrainians to surrender. So this is the regular pattern of the Russians in this area. Before any offensive operation, before any major offensive operation, first the Russians are trying to suggest and propose to Ukrainians to surrender, and only then the Russians begin offensive. This episode was located exactly in this point, and we came to the conclusion that the next thing that the Russians are going to do, they will attack along M15 road with the purpose to outflank the settlement of Kamara from the northeast and from the north. When talking about the village of Kamar itself, the settlement is under very heavy fire. The Russians are bombing and attacking this village with all type of calibers they have, FABs, multiple launch rocket systems, and artillery. And the Russians establish complete control over the main supply lines that go in the direction of Kamar from the northwest. So we expect that the battle for Kamar would be finished during the next 48 hours, and this is going to be a breaking and turning point in the battle for the entire Donetsk region. Now let's go to the Gulay Polya and the Zaporozhye direction. If you remember, during the previous several days, we were talking a lot about the village of Malinovka, and today we got several changes on the ground. According to information we have, during the previous 48 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions to the south and to the southeast of the settlement of Malinovka. According to information we have, these three lines and trenches were taken by the Russians as a result of offensive. So the Russians are getting closer and closer, and most likely the Russians will continue further because they will try to attack this village from the east and from the south. When talking about the Zaporozhye and Kherson direction, nothing special. Very interesting updates and article we got from the southern parts of Ukraine. According to information we have, the Ukrainians are planning to carry out special operation with the purpose to land infantry on the Kinburn speed. So something huge might happen in the very near future, and something interesting can be probably prepared and implemented by the Ukrainians during the next several days. So let's wait and see what is going to be next. But one thing we know for sure, that the Russians were bombing and attacking the Odessa region probably during the previous days heavily, probably with the purpose to break Ukraine plans and to ruin Ukraine plans regarding this landing operation. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds